Oh boy. We might have an issue. Doesn't seem to be going live. Bear with me, guys. All right. No, we are live. All right. Glad we got that worked out. Thank you for bearing with me, folks. We have some slight technical difficulties, more user error than actual software error. But welcome, everyone. We are excited to be giving you all an overview, quick look, deep dive, however we want to take this. Look at Portals today. I'm joined by Ionic CEO Max Lynch and project manager for Portals, Josh Thomas. Why don't y'all say hello?
I was going to let Max go first, but I guess I'll go first. Hello, I am Josh Thomas. I'm the product manager of Portals, Capacitor, and Framework, which is a pretty recent thing. But happy to be here and to show off Portals to the audience and to a broader segment of the population.
Cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. I was just tweeting, trying to tell people that we're live to join us. So very important.
Cool. So I guess we're here to talk about Portals, and I'm assuming we're not talking about the video game. We're talking about something completely different.
I mean, I guess we can.
I mean, we could. Do we want to spend 20 minutes kind of going over the deep lore of Aperture Science?
I have been playing the community-made Portal Reloaded, which has been way too difficult for me. But I'm not smart enough for it. But
there's a community edition of Portal.
I think it's Portals. Yeah, it has a element of time travel, and it's so much harder than the regular Portal. Yeah.
I mean, Portal's the game. The very first one was difficult for me, just trying to figure out how to time the jumps where you have to continuously loop to build up momentum. I can imagine the time is just going to be another complex variable to deal with.
I have never played Portals, but
you know all the reference or memes?
That's the thing, is I've never played, but I know all the memes, so I figure that's probably good enough.
I think that's good enough. That'll get you through most of the stuff. Cool. So we're not talking about Portals game though, but we are talking about Portals, a interesting project from that's kind of born out of Capacitor. Josh, did you want to kind of talk about what Portals is and the history behind it?
Sure. It is born out of Capacitor, and it's actually the same team that built Portals that work on and maintain Capacitor. I would say over the last couple of years, we've had some requests from customers and community about creating a product like Portals. We like to call it a supercharged web view that's available for native applications and for native developers to inject into those native applications. And that web view itself is enhanced in a way where you can use Capacitor applications and Capacitor plugins inside of it.
Yeah, I think just going to say that the genesis of it was, I think we realized that we're one of the more experienced teams in the mobile world around taking web apps and bringing them to native apps. And we built all this technology to do it. I personally, when I built the first version of Capacitor, a lot of that work is basically just managing a web view. And there's so much painful boilerplate that you have to deal with. I don't know if we want to get into all those technical details just yet, but we realized, hey, if we could package this up and other people could use it so they get the benefits of Capacitor, but they don't need to build their app following the Capacitor hybrid model. They could just continue what they're doing. And then we had people getting in touch periodically that were traditional native development teams and they had to bring the web assets because every app does, whether you realize it or not. Like every app that you're using that's a serious app or has is part of a company that's been around for a long time, they have a lot of existing web assets. So we got a lot of requests for that, and we said, hey, that's a use case that we're not really catering to today. That'd be really interesting. That would really kind of let us take the technology we've already built and kind of maximize the application of it. And that was the genesis of Portals.
So it kind of sounds like it's the exact opposite angle of taking a web app and putting it in native, but this time it's taking a native app and then letting you put web features without actually compromising on the native capabilities that you still probably want to call from within that web app, correct?
Yeah, usually when I talk with customers about it, I talk about it as an inverse of what you can currently do with Capacitor, where Capacitor itself, when you're deploying applications that are built with it, it's like this really thin layer around the web application or web view for the native application that allows you to load in the plugins. But in this case, there's a lot more availability from native developers building native applications who just want to include a web view that is enhanced.
Nice. I remember years ago trying to do something similar to this at my previous job. It was just like this little deeply embedded help section within a larger native app. But I think with that one, being able to call like native functionality wasn't actually possible from the stock web view. And Capacitor basically acts as that full native web view, and just we still have the same kind of access to native APIs from within there, correct?
Correct. Yep.
So cool.
For Portals, you can use all of the core Capacitor plugins as well. So they're packaged in a way where it's easy for native developers to include into the native applications and expose them to the web developers who are working in the web view.
I'm just mildly jealous because this is stuff I wish I had working on that project years ago.
The way I like to think about what it ultimately is kind of just a more powerful browser that we've added new APIs to, if you will. So So if you're in the web layer as the web developer, you'll automatically have maybe a new API available that you imported or available on window, however you want to do it, that maybe it's a feature that's not available in the browser if you're running in the browser context, but because you're running natively, maybe it's a feature that the native app exposes to the web view. So you kind of add new APIs to that web view, and there's a really structured battle tested API for building those extensions, those plugins, exposing them to the web view, communicating back and forth. So, with a web view, a web developer is going to call a JavaScript function, which is going to communicate to the native layer, which is going to run some native code, which is going to communicate back. Keeping all that in sync is really, really tricky. And that's what you need to do if you're going to have, really good web and native integration. And if you do this stuff as a native developer, I guarantee you every single big app has built a more brittle, less fun version of that that doesn't have all the features. And that's kind of what Portals is. It does all that stuff for you. You drop it into your app. It's easy to expose functionality of the web view. It's easy to control what the web developers can actually get access to. And you don't really need to make any other changes. It's just like a drop in. It probably just cuts out thousands of lines of code that you had to maintain in your native app.
So it's a good thing we have a well-tested, very popular native layer. I think, Max, you tweeted out the install rates not too long ago. It's good to see that Capacitor is getting used for people beyond just the cross-platform web folks that we are so well known for. Which kind of brings me to the second question. Like, where's the balance for like who this is for? Are we talking just like full native teams, or like people who are used to doing web and web native? Like, where's that kind of balance strike for users?
I would say the balance is really depend on the needs of the organization, right? If you're building a new application, I'm going to tell people to go just with Capacitor. There's no reason not to. But if you have an existing application that's built with native, I think that Portals is a great option for including additional developers and additional experiences into those applications. I think a lot of what we've seen from organizations and companies is that they're really looking for a way to allow more developers to contribute to their existing native applications.
I mean, yeah, how many times do we hear the story of, oh, here's a native iOS team, but they're struggling to find iOS developers, or they're spending way too much time in, like, I don't know, one portion of the app which could be abstracted away and just use web technologies. And this is like that perfect case of, we just want to empower our teams to do, whatever they need to do to get a product shipped.
Yeah, and this isn't a replacement for native developers, right? You're still going to need the native developers to build and maintain this application. It's just a way for empowering web developers to also be able to contribute to the application. And I think that's something that that has been powerful for organizations as we talk with them about it. It really does resonate.
I kind of see it as a way to just make something they're already doing a lot easier and less painful. Kind of like I said, every single big app is using web assets, and you can imagine if you're part of a big company, you've had a specific like portal experience or a support page or something that's been on the web for years, and you're working on a mobile app and maybe you're building it purely natively. 99% of the time, you're not going to try to rebuild that whole web portal experience natively. You're just going to embed it because you have more pressing things to do in your app that are more relevant to the actual like problem your app is trying to solve. And so you'll try to bring in that web experience, but doing that sounds easy, but in practice, it's actually pretty tricky, and the experience often is not that great. So we just want to. There's a lot of different use cases you can use portals for, but that's, I think, the biggest thing I want to leave people with is if you're already invested in the native development approach for iOS and Android, Portals is just a way to do something you're already doing a lot more easily and with way less code for you to maintain, and something that's supported and tested by another company, and you can focus on what's unique about your actual app and not reinventing the wheel.
Imagine being able to take an entire like SF web view, instead of using that, drop that out and just switch to a portal, and being able to have that transition and have all of that user experience stay the same without having a pop up like, okay, open this page in Safari, open this page, change, like manage the state between that and passing data back. This just seems like it's so much easier.
Yeah, you can really control like the user experience and design, have it be like fit your design rather than something that's kind of a sacrifice.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a great way to talk about it, Max.
Well, I seem to have somebody who is very, very passionate about this. They want us to stop talking and show them the code. I believe we have a demo for this. Just to kind of really,
developer.
I know, right? To stop telling, show me.
I didn't realize I was supposed to show code today. Should I? I guess I should pop that open.
Yeah, a little bit. If you have like something or a demo, or just show like what we can check out. We probably don't need to open up a full-blown editor for this. We could just open up this little lightweight editor called Xcode. It's little.
Well, Xcode for the native devs, but I want to show VS Code for the web devs.
Okay, well, we can do that.
That's actually something we didn't talk about. Was that one of the things that I personally enjoy most about using Capacitor and with Portals is that the APIs are typed. And I think that that's this really powerful piece of this, is that you've got this strong contract within types as to how these APIs to the native interface are actually working. It's not just JavaScript.
That's nice. That's nice. I mean, imagine how many times you have to like use an API, but then just like guess what's actually going on. This is just, hey, we know what you're doing. We know what arguments you need to pass along. Here's what that argument type should be. You're good to go.
Yeah,
I
my
think,
development requires IntelliSense.
Well, there's code snippets on the Portals homepage, so maybe we can just run through some of those for both iOS.
Oh, I
and
actually
Android.
have all of this set up and ready. Yes, if you want me to show the demo.
Yeah,
Let's get the demo. All right, let's add this to stream. Well, we're gonna see a little
Whoa.
inception.
How about now?
Much better.
All right.
Want to just bump that font size on the
Oh,
VS
for
Code
sure. Oh, for VS Code, so everything looks like fine on the other one?
More or less.
All right. And I actually have the app over here running already.
Oh, nice. It's like everything's already prepared.
Almost. Is that better?
Oh, that's good.
All right. So this is the example app that we built to really dog food Portals internally, so that we felt like the product that we're building is actually for the right people. Based on a lot of the discovery that I've done over the last 6 months and talking with different companies, we wanted to create this demo application that really encompassed and showed a lot of what we could do with Portals. So this is a native application. And if you've watched any of my videos previously on Portals, you've probably already seen this. And unfortunately, this is not actually an Ionic store that's available right now, although I am applying pressure to try to make that happen.
At least to get the capacitor snapbacks.
Yeah, I think one of the things you won't see in here is that headband. So here, this is just a native screen with a list of products in it. This application is, it has a couple tabs. So there's the cart tab, which I've already added an item to the cart, and then like my profile. This isn't actually my address anyway, but that's my avatar. So if we dive in and take a look at one of the specific products, so this is the capacitor snapback hat, and the description's Lauren Edson, but we can add it to the cart. And if we want to know, or if we need additional help, we can click help. But this is actually what we're seeing right now is a web view. And you may not have noticed it before, but this profile page is actually a web view as well. You think I should pop open inspect? That probably makes it a little easier to see. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I know, actually, this was something that I remember when we were showing this demo during our last event. People were asking, what is inspect? Just for the people who are curious, because I know this is going to pop up. Anytime you show a tool, people are like, oh, what is that tool?
Yeah, so this is a tool that was built by, gosh, I can't remember his name right now. But anyway, it's a tool that's available on inspect.io, I believe. And it just allows you to look at web views in mobile devices. And in this case, it works really well for Portals because we can just look at the web views that exist within the emulator or on device. So you can see here, everything highlighted in blue right now on the emulator itself is a web view. So it makes it really obvious.
So those tabs at the bottom, that's a fully native tab component?
Correct. Yes,
oh, that's so cool.
Those are native. If we go back over here, you can see that everything in this screen is actually web as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
So even this back button, right? That's web.
Mm-hmm.
Can I address a good question?
Yeah.
That came up. So does Apple reject apps that are using Portals? Because in the Apple guidelines, they say they're not allowed changing behavior now. The answer is absolutely no. So Portals is a web view. And like we said, every single app, pretty much every single big app is using web view in some way. So where you start to run into issues with Apple is if you are modifying the functionality of your app in a significant way remotely. That has nothing to do with portals, but rather your use of portals. So the answer to that is absolutely no.
Yeah, and we've actually had a couple discussions on this internally, that it's really a misconception that people don't understand when they're looking at a native application, what pieces of it are web and what pieces aren't. And that's actually a good thing for the developers. But I think that we're looking at creating a blog that's going to point some of those out in major applications that people use.
I think that we know of a major music app that is like 90% web.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, is that everyone talks about Apple rejecting these applications, and we know for sure that Apple uses web views in their applications. I mean, Apple Music uses web views. I believe the App Store uses web views. There's quite a few of their applications that actually have web views for just central content.
So it sounds like Apple is using their own potentially brittle portals knockoff when they could just be using us.
Yeah, maybe we should get on the phone with them about that.
Give us a call, Apple. So
does this have the payment stuff integrated? I forget.
This does not have the payments integrated, but it does have the checkout integrated. So here you can see as I click checkout, this is actually opening a native modal. But within that native modal, it just contains a portal-based web view.
So I think the idea here is, I think some people would look at this and say, okay, well, you're trying to get me to replace my native app with web. Like that's not what the case is. The case, what the takeaway from this is, imagine you already just have your web-based order flow and you want to bring that into the app really quickly and easily, but you don't want it to look like an ugly full screen web browser experience. You want to have full control over the actual user experience so it looks good and feels good. But you didn't have to go and rebuild that whole order flow. Maybe you will in the future. You'll decide, hey, we want to actually bring that web-based order flow into the native app, and we're going to invest the time on our roadmap to rebuild it natively. That's fine. But you have the option to not do that and bring it in, but have it not feel awful like a lot of just like browser modals do.
For sure. And I think one of the interesting pieces here is that people don't realize this cancel link here is actually just part of the web view.
So this is using Ionic for the UI, but that doesn't but it's not necessarily tied to Ionic itself, right?
No, you can use whatever you want within the web view. It's just that when we built this out, we used Ionic because it's really easy to make things look nice. This is actually an Ionic React application.
Ooh. You'll have to show us how like some of the calls to like the native APIs and how all this stuff gets wired up real quick.
Let's take a look.
Cool.
So here you can see this is the index.tsx file. And again, all of this source code is available. If anyone wants to take a look at it, it's on our GitHub. But let's take a look at this specific page, the checkout page. And there it is. That's the cancel button that we're seeing here in the web view.
So it's just calling, or not calling, but publishing an event more or less.
Yep. And the data is just cancel.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yep. Now, from the web side, right, that looks like a really easy way to integrate requests to your native code, right? In this case, it's using the Portals plugin that comes out of the box. But you can actually build your own plugins and use them, or you can use your already built Capacitor plugins as well. In this case, I think that for this web view, we're not actually calling out, we're gathering the data. Yeah, so in this case, It's using the data context, which is using the data provider, and it's actually gathering data. Right here, shop API, update user details, shop API, get cart. And this shop API is just a Capacitor plugin that was built specific for this application. So in order to fulfill the content on this screen, we're actually just asking the native app for the information.
Oh, that's so cool.
And that's how we have the total here.
So we're basically just saying native, give the actual values versus JavaScript computing it.
Exactly. So, right, we're at 128. Here we go. And that's just because we're asking the native application for the details as we display this view. More than likely, people aren't going to develop this way. You're probably going to have this view itself, like asking some backend service for the information. But we built it this way because it was the easiest to display and show people how to interact with the Portals APIs.
If I might though, this is probably a good use case for showing how to have like a shared state service between native that is managed in native and still can pass those values back and forth. But the web can now also access that state and do whatever it needs, potentially even mutating it.
Yeah.
Or redefining what the state is if we want to be proper Redux folks.
I mean, if you want to look, this page, like we talked about, the user detail page is also the web view. So as I go here and I modify content, I actually prefer to be called Joshua. Let's go in here. Let's go check out. There we go. So what I did was I modified the content in the user profile page, which updated the native reference to that information. So we actually told native to change my name. And then as I showed a new web view, that information was passed back down.
Josh, could you show the native side and how you initialize this in
For
Swift?
sure.
Max got to my next question. Yeah, because I'm used to seeing some of the web demo, the web code, and showing how that works. I'm curious on how the native side, works and how this all gets wired up. That's something that is out of my comfort zone. So if it's this easy, maybe I should start learning some Swift.
Swift is pretty nice. So here you can see as we're displaying this portal, we're asking the portal manager for this portal that's specific to the user. Let's go back to that. And we're saying that the starting route in this particular application is /user. So because our team was doing the web application for all three portals, like the help portal, the user profile portal, and the checkout portal, we felt like it was easiest to build it as just a single page app so that all the resources can be shared more easily across them. So what the approach we took is that each portal references a route in this React Ionic application. So that in this case, the profile that we're looking at right now is just /user. And if we were to look at this is /checkout, I believe, or /cart. It's just an easier way to work in the web application. Now, if you have separate teams that are responsible for the different portals, then they can be separated completely as different web applications. They don't have to be combined into a single web application. It's really up to the structure of the organization or the teams that you're working with. All right, so in this case, we are exposing that information through this portal. If we look at, I believe it's in the, I haven't looked at this code in a bit, but.
Don't worry. I'm the same way when I look at code that I haven't looked at in forever. And that's just with web code.
So just close the bottom debugger thing.
Yes. Yep. So this is the shop API plugin that we built. And remember, we saw this referenced within VS Code, that this is how it was updating and requesting information.
Mm-hmm.
And here in our .h file, we're defining the plugins that are, or the methods that are exposed. So get cart, get user details, update user details, and then we're saying the type. So if you've ever built a Capacitor plugin, this is something you're already familiar with. But let's take a look at one. So get cart. And this is referencing the cart from the data provider. Update.
So the idea here, just to reiterate to everyone, is the native development team built a plugin here in Swift and explicitly defined the methods that are going to be accessible in the web view. So it's the web developers are only going to have access to the things that you actually put in there. So checkout result, update user details. So you have this really defined, like it kind of going back to what I said earlier. It's like you created your own browser API, and you have full control over it, but you just limit it to the only what you want to allow the web developer to be able to call, and then you manage the call, process things on the native side, and then return that data back. Then Portals manages that communication. So when you call it call.resolve and you pass in that like a data object, Portals can manage making sure that returns right back to the explicit place the web developer called it, has the promise semantics that the developer expects, and matches them all up, because these are asynchronous, right? Like you have to keep track of calls and responses, and that underlying communication layer is where a lot of the magic happens in Portals.
Yeah, and if we want to take a look at the actual API for this from a TypeScript perspective.
Yeah.
Right. So this specific interface coincides with what is being exposed from the plugin on the native side. So get cart resolves a promise of with the data of cart, which is a model that's available.
Really, it's just passing back, and it's just sharing the actual, I guess, outline of what the implementation is, and then Capacitor is being able to process what calls are coming from within the plugin and mapping that automatically back to the native platform.
Exactly.
So that's just Capacitor,
Right.
Plugins 101.
Well, that's the interesting piece of this, right? Is that if you're familiar with Capacitor and Capacitor plugins, then you should have no problem creating these. If you're not familiar with them, you can educate yourself based on what's available already already in the community for plugins that have been created, or our documentation that's available for creating Capacitor plugins. It's not really a new concept. It's just reusing it in a new way.
Nice. That's a good way to put it. It's reframing what already exists and exposing it to a different user set.
Exactly.
Cool. So awesome. That's just like, that's wild to me, because this was stuff that didn't actually like exist when I had to deal with it, and it's good to know that it exists now. I'm curious. I have to ask. This is free, right?
It is free.
So
Go sign up and get a key for it and install it. It's available from CocoaPods and from Maven Central. So if you're working on iOS, use CocoaPods. If you're working on Android, use Maven Central.
And the only thing you need is a quick little Ionic account, and you can just add a portal to your native app right away.
Definitely.
That's
And
awesome.
and that's the really interesting piece of this, is that in order to add a portal to an existing native application, it should be quite easy. It's just a little bit of code to enable it. And then if you have an existing capacitor application, or if you want to spin up a new capacitor application to be injected into the portal, that's just using the tooling that we already provide.
So cool. So awesome. I think that's good for the demo, Josh. Let's we've got a few questions that popped up during all of this. And
All right.
I kind of want to go through them because I think they're pretty awesome. So let's start off with this question. Start off like right at the start of things. The ability to share login session, or I guess any browser session with native and web. Like what's the story there? Maybe is this a difficult one to start off with?
No, this is a great one, because this is like one of the most common questions we get, right? Is that your native application is already authenticated. I'm including a web view. I want the web view experience to be authenticated as well, right? So that's just information. If you already have that key, that auth token, just pass it into the web application, and your web application can request it from the native app, and it just works.
I love how excited you got.
Oh, I'm very excited, because this is something that everyone asked for, and as soon as they see this tech, that's the first thing that jumps in their mind.
Well, I mean, it's like that's the most important thing, because how many times do people want to, like, you're already logged in one part of your app, then you transition, and all of a sudden, like, you're logged out. It's just that whole user experience just breaks down so quickly.
Right.
There.
And what kind of hacky stuff do I need to try to accomplish in order to get this to work? And it's like, well, no, you don't. You just use the APIs that are exposed. It's fairly straightforward.
Like create your own web view, then write to session storage, or like execute JavaScript right into the session storage to like store all that. That would be a nightmare.
That was a softball.
Oh, that was a softball? All right, all right. Well, here's another one. Maybe it's going to be a difficult question. Any chance of loading external URLs in portals?
So this is a more difficult question. This is something that we have talked about, and it is not something that is available right now in portals. And one of the reasons for that is that the user experience for external URLs is not going to be as good as the user experience of local files. When you have to deal with network latency, whenever you're loading that web view and there's a delay in the latency of downloading that content, it's going to be very obvious to the user. And as much as you can load from on device, it's going to be a lot faster. So today we don't really have a way of including additional content into the application if you want to make updates. That's usually why people want to use external servers, is that they can just do a CI/CD push and it immediately updates their applications. But we are working on bringing live updates from AppFlow into portals, and that's our next big feature we're going to be shipping.
So everyone
Let's
get
talk
hyped.
about that. Well, let's
Yeah,
dig into that for just 1 second. So
Yeah,
live updates is something that developers who build a pure capacitor app or Ionic app are pretty used to. And that's the ability to actually update your app remotely in a way that is App Store friendly, assuming that you're abiding by the other terms of service where you're not modifying the functionality of your app.
Exactly. As long as you're not updating your native as well, right?
Yeah, so you can, what's really interesting about that with this, that a lot of people aren't used to if they're just using a web view in a native app, is you can actually deploy your web app locally in the app. So it works offline and has all those benefits, but then update it remotely without having to resubmit the app. So that's what this live update feature will allow. It's not quite there yet, but when you think about like, what's our plan with portals from like a, platform standpoint, it's try to get a lot of teams using portals for just a better web view in their app. So we're not trying to like convince them to switch to hybrid or anything like that. It's, are you building a native app already? Well, you're probably using web views, so just use portals instead because it's a lot better, has more features, you have to maintain less code, etc. And then we're adding features like live update that are cloud powered, so you can, you have the optional, you don't have to use it, but that will add new functionality like being able to update those portals remotely for just a really nice experience. So that's our longer term plan with portals.
Right. And that's something that web teams are used to today, right? We're used to releasing whenever they want. So why not continue to allow them to do that just within the native application?
Max, you touched on a really good point that I'm sorry, Josh, I don't know if you mentioned it, the offline access of having everything local. Like you mentioned the latency, but imagine if
True.
like you just get there and all of a sudden you're on a subway or just in spotty Wi-Fi and like the page just doesn't load. That's a terrible user experience. Just show it locally and then be able to update that, like you said, Max, kind of on the fly and whenever you CI shows that the update is green.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously going to work for some types of apps and not for others. But I think right now, if you look at a typical native app that's using web content, there's two worlds, right? Like there's the local and offline friendly native part of it, and then there's the internet only web-based version. And I think portals can totally embrace that use case, and that's probably the majority. But there's that world in the middle where you want to also have offline local web experiences that, like you said, load even if network connections are spotty and can be updated remotely, because again, that code is actually local to your app. It's not necessarily being fetched from a server. So that's that gray area that portals is kind of like a new concept that it enables for native development teams.
Cool. So let's go on to the next question. Our friend Joe wants to know, can portals communicate between themselves? And then they added a little bit more to that, i.e., if you have 3 native tabs that each load up their own individual portal. So how's that cross communication story?
So there is no cross communication between portals, but we expect your native application to be able to facilitate that communication. So you can definitely, as we saw previously within the demo that I showed, where I updated the content from one web view in one portal, and it updated the data store that's being contained by native, and then that was fetched back down by another portal web view. And that's how we expect people to develop with it.
Right, because if the portal itself is just reading that data and then passing updates back to the native app, it kind of makes sense to keep the native app, at least in some regard, to as the source of the truth.
Exactly.
Versus like now you're dealing with who's telling who what the state is. This way, there at least is like one mediator that's saying, I hold all the state. I will tell you what the state is. You tell me what updates you want to apply. And I'll process that.
For sure.
And then Joe again, could that shop API been implemented in JavaScript
instead of TypeScript?
Instead of TypeScript?
I guess.
I think maybe the question is,
yes.
could you do that on the web side versus in the native side?
It depends on the piece, right? We talked about the shop API, which is the web consumption of how it's communicating with native. And then we also talked about the shop API from the native. Okay. Instead of Swift, no, it cannot. It needs to be done by your native team within the native application.
Well, I think it's an arbitrary example. Like you could do whatever you want as long as you solve your problem. In this case, they were trying to prove the point that the native team already had functionality in their app. They're trying to expose it. So that's not really like I don't think there's like a definitive answer to that question.
It's one of those, it depends, and that's never a really good answer to developers.
Like most software.
It depends. That's the situation we found ourselves in, and we had to do what we had to do with what we had already. So here's a good one from Robert, and it's kind of a framed, migrating from native to a fully, capacitor-driven app. If you implement a web implementation of the communication plugin, could then call JavaScript state management. Thus, you share the same portal code with a hybrid application.
So you could actually build a hybrid or web native application with Capacitor, and you could use that web code in a portal. There's nothing preventing that, and that's essentially what's happening under the covers. Is that if you have an existing hybrid application or web native application that you've built, you could place that within a portal as long as you're using the same versions of plugins and the same plugins.
So in theory, if we kind of look at it, you were built like in the example that you showed, you were building a single page app that acted as the entry point for all these different portals. You could start building that out, replicating certain features, maybe doing some feature toggles here and there. Then when it comes time to completely swap over to that capacitor driven app versus a fully native app, you already have all those API calls, you already have all that implementation done, and you're just basically saying, hey, show this versus the fully native app.
Yes.
That'd be like a full inception
It's like
where you start off native.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a native app and you want to make it a full web native app, there is a path for that now.
Oh, that I want to see what this someone do that and then hear the story about that migration, because I'm sure that'd be a fun engineering feat and something to like check off. Like, well, that's what I did.
Right, but you don't have to think about it as like a completely greenfield, right?
Exactly.
You don't have to think about trying to re-implement all of that code that you've already written and try to encapsulate all of the business requirements if it's already complete.
Awesome. So it looks like we're towards the end of our questions. Give a few seconds while I pull up some links. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat. We'd love to go over them while we look up the Portals website. Josh, where can people go if they want to learn more about Portals or check out some of the documentation?
Ionic.io/portals.
Perfect. Let's get that posted and show that to everyone. Might I say that is a fine looking website that we got up there. Ben really outdid himself this time.
Oh, it is beautiful.
I know.
Do we want to just we've got 10 minutes. I think one of the things we haven't really touched on was actual interest and real like kind of demand we've seen for this.
Perfect. Yeah,
like we're not really we're not building portals just randomly because we think it's cool. We've actually had a lot of interest in it, especially from big teams that are managing like very diverse infrastructure where they have existing web apps, they've got native apps. Like what maybe we could talk a little bit about what we're seeing there and what the demand for this actually is. Like, why are we doing this at all?
I mean, we do think it is cool, but yeah.
I mean, so in 2020, I think that we had 2 or 3 companies approach us and ask for this product specifically because they were building it internally themselves, and it was an engineering feat, and they wanted to go to the organization that was responsible for Capacitor and for all of the knowledge and support that we offer today. And
these were 2 or 3 companies with pretty huge,
very sizable companies. Yeah. Yes, not to name names, but and then earlier this year, I was tasked with doing some discovery around this. So we did some outreach to those organizations, and then we also put a page up asking for people's interest, which this is what was previously on ionic.io/portals. And out of the around 1,000 entries, I would say, of people looking for this, and a lot of major companies. I've had I don't know how many calls, probably close to 60, 70 calls with companies with interest. And we worked with them as we spec'd out what Portals was going to look like. So it wasn't just an idea that we had and that we built ourselves. This is something that was pulled out of us from the community, and we built it based on specs and needs from companies, looking at the various different types of applications that they had in-house. So it wasn't just us coming up with the specs. It was definitely product led based on the conversations we had with these organizations.
That's a nice little point, is the actual like business end of it. These are problems that probably, a lot of people are going to face regardless of their company sizes. Just as soon as they start mixing that native and web. But it just helps that we actually have like good data on what problems are people trying to solve, and how can we help and make that easier.
Yes, and I think that. Thank you.
Thank you, DevH.
Some of the recent requests we had with releasing this were around packaging for iOS. So two requests we had were to make this available for Carthage and for Swift Package Manager, which is something that's underway right now.
I haven't even heard of those two things.
Well,
I don't
you're
even
not a
know
native
what that
dev.
is. What is Carthage?
You're familiar with Cocoa Pods, right?
By name only, and because I had dinner with one of their lead devs on it a while ago, but barely, and because I know I see it pop up in the capacitor like sync layer. It's like installing Cocoa Pods. Like, guess that's something to do with iOS.
But it's really important, right, that we create this application. It's something to be installed by native developers. So we need to create an application and library that's easy for them to adopt and to allow for these additional capabilities within web views that web developers are going to be excited about working with.
Well, that's awesome. And let's make sure what we got. Any other questions coming from folks? Looks like we're good on questions. Oh, I do see one question, and this is a really good one. Security. How safe is this? Safety is always like it changes from time to time, I guess. But what are and this is probably more geared towards about capacitor. What are security concerns here?
Max, you want to speak to that specifically? I can't really say there are specific concerns. This is a battle-tested bridge that's been in production by a lot of companies for a few years now.
Yeah, I mean, I think security is a really broad question. There's security of the actual library, and we feel very confident about that. We've deployed this, like the technology and this behind like pretty major consumer apps, some that you've probably used. And so, part of this is it's battle tested on the security side of your app. The question there is, are you exposing stuff to the web development team, to the web view in a way that's secure? Don't provide an interface to let the web app execute arbitrary native code. It's like it's up to you to kind of make sure you're exposing things in a secure, safe way. And so what we try to do on the actual usage side is just make it easy to expose things in a very explicit, safe way, so you can have full control over, hey, we're going to let the web view have be able to call this one method, and we're going to expect this type of data back, and we're going to validate that it's good data. That's really on your use of Portals.
Again, another situation where there's no real good, straightforward answer, because it all depends on where you're trying to focus, I guess. So with the last few minutes, we do have the most important question. And I'm going to have to not be able to answer this because I have no opinion on either. Apples or bananas? Or opals and bononos?
I'm going to go with apples because my kids eat 100 apples a day, or at least they take a single bite out of it and then discard it.
Oh gosh,
Apples for me.
I got to go with the same apples. It's that time of year for me, so it's definitely apples.
I will go with neither because they are both just gross. And
Not
disgusting.
meat.
Not meat or potatoes or corn. You know, I grew up I am the picky eater that everyone hears about.
It's good to hear, Max, that it's not just my kids who are taking a whole apple out, taking a bite of it and leaving it someplace sitting in the house.
Oh yeah, yeah. Or my kids are into baking, so they demand me make them from scratch apple pie on demand.
Yeah, I do that too.
Well, that sounds like a whole nother set of challenges than mixing native and web. So
Portals will not solve that problem for you.
Portals will not solve that problem, but it will solve everything else. Thank you both so much for hanging out for an hour. It looks like we are good with questions. Again, everyone, if you would like to know more about Portals, ionic.io/portals, give it a try. It's free. You just need a quick little account, and you can give it a shot, see what demos that we have available. And I had the link for it earlier. Boom. You can check it at github.com/ionicteams/portals-ecommerce-demo. We have to come up with better and shorter names for this stuff.
It's hard for an organization like ours. We have a lot of open source projects.
It ain't easy being an open source, I'll say that. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and hanging out. Thank you again, Max and Josh. Check out those links and give Portals a shot. And we will see you next time. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.